Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Junior Economic Club of Canada Interviews. We are a federally registered nonprofit organization led by students committed to promoting learning and interest in the field of economics, business, and finance. Among our various initiatives and activities, we seek to have interviews with expert industry professionals who are so kind enough to share their invaluable knowledge and experiences to us youthful aspiring economists. My name is Andrew Wu, National Director of the Junior Economists, and I will be your host for today's episode. Today, I have great honor and pleasure to be joined by Mr. Burleton, who is the Vice President and Deputy Chief Economist for TD Bank. In his role, he leads a team of economists that provide leading analysis on the Canadian and US economies, and he is a frequently interviewed and quoted economic commentator in the media and on television. Mr. Burleton, on behalf of JEC Canada, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. We're extremely grateful to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. There's certainly a lot going on these days, and for an economist, it's phenomenal. I mean, in terms of uncertainty, trying to understand all the moving parts. So it keeps feeding our curiosity and keeps us very engaged.
That's great to hear. I'm sure that there's still a lot for everybody to learn. So it's good to hear that, I guess, even at your seniority, there's still stuff that you're getting out of this and stuff that you're learning. So before we get started with, I guess, the meat of this interview, let's just start off with an introductory question. I think you've probably already alluded to it a little bit but can you tell us what you enjoy most about the field of economics and what some of your responsibilities leading a team of economists are?
I think it's just that. I mean, for those of you, I remember when I was going through high school, probably something I learned from my parents was just to be very interested in current events, following them, following the news cycles, and to get paid to do that sort of thing is just it's a dream. And I've been doing this more than 20 years, and I still love it. You tend to every year is different. I know we often say it's an uncertain year. Every year is uncertain because we never know exactly what's going to happen. And clearly there are times where things are more uncertain than others. But I think that's the big part of it. It's clients get affected by the economy, whether you're a wealth client, a retail client of the bank, commercial client. Economy is fundamental, and to be able to be in a situation where I can explain in a very understandable terms what's going on, have views of the future. It just is something that I truly enjoy doing and writing about it as well. In terms of leading, I think one of the things I enjoy is helping economists because they could be researching any odd topic, is to help them really narrow down on the most important aspects, to work with them. I've been doing this a long time. I've been through a lot of different cycles, and to provide my experiences to help them along, and to see them flourish over time is really quite exciting for me.
Wow, that's amazing to hear. And it seems that you've certainly had a very extensive experience in economics, and to be able to, I guess, help all those other economists who you work with, it must be such a rewarding experience.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, we put a lot of emphasis on the people we attract. We're looking for people that share those kind of values, and that's been a secret of our departmental success over the years, I think.
Great to hear and learn about. Thank you. So now, without further ado, let's dive into some of the questions regarding the current economic issues in today's society. And we're about to start then the threat of US tariffs. And given these unpredictable threats that President Trump is posing on Canada's economy, I was just wondering, what can Canada do going forward to ensure its long-term economic stability? And would it make sense for Canada to try and become less dependent on US trade?
Yeah, I mean, if there's one silver lining, because this is not a trade situation that the country has asked for. Clearly part of the new administration, but here we are cast in this circumstances where, yeah, it's just so uncertain. And I know that the 30-day pause that Canada was recently granted was good news. Hopefully, cooler minds will prevail, and we'll be able to negotiate with the United States and reduce the risk. But We don't know. We don't know how this is going to play out. So, one of the silver linings of it, though, is something we had been pushing governments to was to start to look at how, as a country, we can look at the policies to boost our productivity. And I haven't seen this much action in a long time. I mean, we've been through cycles in the past. I remember in the late 90s, Canada's currency was in sharp decline. We were running very large federal deficits, large current account deficits, very reliant on foreign capital, and we were considered the Mexican peso of the North. And with the currency under free fall, the Bank of Canada having to raise rates to defend it, it really did force structural change in the Canadian economy that lasted through the 90s, getting deficits down to the early 2000s, where corporate taxes were cut and there were a lot of efforts to improve competitiveness. Fortunately, we didn't see those through. And then we went through a different cycles, and here we are today where it's back in, and we realize that we've got to, get our house in order from a long-term perspective because the U.S. just isn't necessarily there just to accept a lot of Canadian export shipments. So interprovincial trade is one area where I actually think something may be done this time. We've talked about it now for 20 years, how it poses the barriers between provinces are just in a small fragmented market is just not helpful at all and costs the economy a lot of foregone revenue and prosperity. So it looks like we're finally going to see some action there. And we should see other knock-on effects from the U.S. Corporate tax competitiveness may come into the budget season. We may see governments across Canada looking at their corporate taxes, looking at ways to improve. Regulation is also a real burden on the economy, looking at ways we can lighten regulatory burdens across the country and across levels of government. So I actually think there's a good chance that we will come through this with some pretty important changes and to see the economy more structurally sound in the future.
Yeah, let's hope for sure that the Canadian government does implement some of these policies that you've mentioned to create structural change, reducing interprovincial trade barriers, creating less bureaucracy, I suppose, to encourage more competition and entrepreneurship. So that's good to hear, and hopefully those changes are permanent and long-lasting. So in the short term, however, how will this economic uncertainty that we are currently experiencing affect both the US and Canadian economies?
Well, it's not helpful. I know that Canada is more trade exposed and the risk of tariffs, because remember, it's two sides of the border. Canada will retaliate on any tariff the U.S. implements. And again, still a lot of uncertainty as to which path the administration takes on tariffs. There are various reasons cited for why the administration is looking at tariffs, including raising revenue, you know, uh, achieving strategic ends, whether, I think at an extreme to turn Canada into a 51st state, but I think just other things as well, looking at dealing with the border issues. Um, and onshoring, bringing more manufacturing back home to the United States. So I think those have all been brought up as reasons for why tariffs are being looked at. But at the end of the day, I think the administration realizes, at least some of the cabinet members do, that it could be a big structural adjustment on the U.S. There's a lot of integrated trade on both sides of the border, particularly northern U.S. states like Michigan through the auto sector. And it would come at some fairly significant risks if they were to levy tariffs too high. So hopefully it doesn't come down to that. It could also deliver an inflationary impulse into the United States at a time where inflation is still a risk. So we'll see. I mean, we don't know how far we're going with these tariffs. I think even if big tariffs aren't implemented, you will have uncertainty that's going to nip investment, to weaken investment in the near term. In Canada, it's a much bigger risk than in the United States. So we'll see. We're lowering our forecast to reflect the impact of ongoing tariff uncertainty because even if these big tariffs aren't announced, I think they won't go away. There still will be that threat that at some point in the future, even if the USMCA is renegotiated, that they could be re-implemented. And I think that tariff will be casting a bit of pall over investment, and we'll be marking down our growth to reflect that. I still think we'll see growth, barring extraordinarily high steep tariffs like 25% and 10% on energy. but it still will mark an economy down that hasn't grown very much in Canada over the past few years and kind of keep that rebound down to a modest rate, which otherwise we'd probably see a bit more growth over the next couple of years.
I guess let's both hope for that we do see this economic growth in Canada and that these tariffs won't be as harsh as initially Trump may have suggested. But just did actually want to touch on one of the points which you mentioned about the potential inflationary effects of the tariffs, because you've previously mentioned that you believe there are at least 3/4 point interest rates to come if the tariffs were to be enacted. Why does it make sense for the Bank of Canada to cut interest rates despite the risk of inflation?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a balance that the Bank of Canada is going to have to walk, and they've indicated that when there's countervailing tariffs, countermeasures on U.S. tariffs, that will, all things equal, drive up prices in Canada. But with the adjustments in the export sector, it's a negative on growth, which all things equal brings down inflation. So, which one comes first? What they've done in their guidance is said, look, we're gonna monitor the data. And my sense is, if tariffs were implemented, it would be government stimulus. It'd be the first course of action, and the Bank of Canada wouldn't just automatically cut interest rates sharply. They'd wait, they'd see what measures are taken, and then depending on how the data flow and whether growth is being more affected than inflation, they would respond accordingly. I think just on interest rate cuts, I think even in a world where we don't see big tariffs, the Bank of Canada has some room to cut interest rates further. The 3/4 points is actually what we have in our baseline right now without big tariffs. And I think the thinking there is that the overarching uncertainty is going to limit the growth. And inflation, I know it's been not a straight line down to 2% target, but it's getting close by that I think the Bank of Canada will probably tweak its settings a little bit lower just to provide some insurance as a risk management. And so we have 2.25 as being at 3% right now, the short-term rate. 2.25 is where we see what we call the neutral interest rate for Canada, and that's a little bit lower. So hence why we've got 3/4 points in our baseline. I think where the risk comes in, if we do get hit by a big tariff shock as an economy, the bank may go further and actually take rates down to 1.5 or even lower than our baseline as a way to kind of support the downside. But you raise a great point. They're going to there's a bit of a balancing act, and it's not 100% clear how they'll go. Depend a bit on the data.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. And sorry, just I know this is a little bit last minute, but to conclude, we did just hear yesterday, I believe, that Donald Trump mentioned he would, and today I believe he's now starting to enact a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports into the US and Canada, given that we are, I believe, the largest importer of steel and aluminum to the US. What are your initial thoughts of this move and how it may impact the Canadian economy?
Yeah, we've been in 2018, the administration under Trump, the 1.0 Trump, implemented 25% tariff on Canadian steel, but only a 10% tariff on Canadian aluminum. This time around, the talk is 25% for both. So, on the one hand, we've kind of been down this path before. We've got a bit of an experience with effects. It did hit exports pretty hard in 2018 until that tariff was eliminated in 2019. There was about a year. We saw about a 25 to 35% drop in exports. And so it did have an impact. And it would this time. We'd be building it in. We haven't had the executive action yet. The assumption is it's going to happen very soon. If it does, we will be marking down growth a little bit more to account for that. But Andrew, I would say that our total exports, only 6% are those two commodities. So I'm not, just dismissing it outright. I think it will have an effect certainly on those industries, because the share of overall exports compared to energy and all that, it's not the lion's share. So it would still see growth in the economy, but to my point earlier, I think we'd have to mark down exports to reflect that. And hopefully there would be either a carve out, or they might lighten, because you think about the US, they're so reliant on Canadian aluminum. The country supplies a good share of the aluminum consumed. Steel is a little different. They have access to other sources. it's a lesser share, but that goes into autos. It goes into a lot of different end use in the United States. So I think there would be certainly vocal cries for the Trump administration within the U.S. to end or at least lighten those tariffs on, particularly on aluminum.
Okay. That's certainly encouraging to hear then, and hopefully we do not see those tariffs enacted too harshly on Canada. And actually, that brings us to an end to our discussion today. Mr. Burleton, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us and for sharing all of your valuable insights. I've really learned a lot about where our economy may potentially be headed and what risks to look out for, and I'm sure our audience has as well. Let's hope then that Canada's economic growth won't be too hampered by the US, and that we do see our way out of this economic uncertainty. So that brings us to an end, and thank you everyone for listening. Thank you so much
Thank
again,
you.
Mr. Burleton.
All the best.